it is. And we all get stuck into it. So, and we don't even realize that the more things that we're judging, all we will do by judging it more is attracting it more. Yeah. So that's really tough for people that are big time into, I'm an advocate for the environment. We become the proverbial hammer that's searching for the nail. Or if you think that you want to help people that are victimized all the time, then maybe all you'll end up experiencing is more and more victimhood. Or if you think you're victimized all the time, then you'll only become that hammer that seeks that nail of victimhood. So we attract everything we judge until we no longer judge what we attracted. That's the point of it, right? We have to understand, and having that realization, it turns everything upside down. Because then you start thinking, well, geez, how many things did I judge? And I kept experiencing it. You'll stop experiencing those same samsara cycles once you stop judging it. Learn to love and accept it. Learn to fall in love with your destiny, with your path. Realize that all of it's connected. Every person you meet, every experience you have is divine. If we can notice how it is divine. And instead of asking, why did the universe do this to me? And what it did for me is it shifted my thinking to, why did I choose this for myself? What was the principle I was hoping to learn? And I can fall in love with that. And that's called amor fati, the love of destiny. I used to believe in coincidences. I used to believe in might makes right. I used to believe that my willpower could create whatever it is I wanted. And I used to think there was a juxtaposition between willpower and destiny. Mm-hmm. But maybe what we call destiny is really just the free will of our higher selves.
I think that's a powerful reframe. It takes the pressure off of us feeling like we have to figure out and force our path, which that is not a recipe for happiness.
No, just go with the river. Yeah. Right? A quote that I heard that I really love is, when the heart thinks and when the mind feels, the river of wisdom flows. And we can then be carried by that river to our destiny. And we just have to simply learn to surrender to that destiny. It'll take us exactly the places that we always were intended to go. So I started thinking, wait, all the things I used to use my manifestation skills and powers and everything to be able to make happen didn't really matter because those are just all the things I chose. So I didn't have to exert all that energy because it was all destined anyway.
Yeah, and most people think of choice just at the conscious level, but the unconscious choices that we're making.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, that's what you're speaking to, and how there's no such thing as you spoke to randomness and coincidence. A coincidence is like an occurrence of events with no apparent causal reason, right? And the more you expand your awareness and see things from a more holistic sense, you see the interconnected nature of things, and that everything actually has a cause and effect.
How would speak to that and how important it is to find on the path of integration of that brain and heart connection?
Because I feel like that's how we become fully activated human beings.
So we don't realize this, but our hearts actually have brain-type tissue in them. Right? It's right around the sinoatrial node. I used to work in cardiology. And it's funny now I look back on my career, I spent a lot of time in medical aesthetics, which is really all about the mask, in a way. At one point in my career, I was the leader of the medical aesthetics industry, the whole industry. It seems so foreign to me now, right? Which is kind of funny. But and it was funny also as well because one of the companies that I co-founded is a company called Evolus, which I didn't ever like the name because it sounded like when people mispronounced it, they would say Evilus. And I'm like, it sounds like evil us. And one day I had a big epiphany because I had felt like, that had led to a lot of the challenges I'd faced in 2016, a lot of the greed issues, everything that I was experiencing, that I had chosen. I had chosen for these realizations. And the big epiphany I had one day was I kept thinking, well, Evolus is a neurotoxin. It's like a Botox. It's toxic. It's caused a lot of greed and all this stuff. And that's why the VCs wanted to have a battle with me over it and everything, which ultimately I luckily won. But I felt like I lost. And because the collateral damage was so great in the process. But the big realization I had one day was that it's not evil us. It's love us backwards. And when I had that realization, it's like, wait, I kept thinking it was also superficial. It's all about beauty and all this stuff. And I had become the hammer that was seeking the nail. And I think that was one of the major reasons I came here to live, is to learn how to transcend these judgments so that I could experience unconditionality of love. So if you're here to learn unconditional love, you will experience betrayal. Yeah. And you will judge because you want that unconditional love so badly. You judge everything that is anathema to that thing, and then you'll just keep experiencing it over and over and over again until you finally realize, oh, it's me that has to learn the unconditional love.
Right. It's like we want strength, but we judge when something difficult comes in our experience that will make us strong.
Right. Absolutely. So I then started realizing, as I started transcending through these things and figuring out that, wait, it's not that I got to blame anyone else. It's me that's got to figure this out. It's all internal to me. That's when I started having big epiphanies in life. And then the things that I had previously thought were coincidence, I started realizing none of it's coincidence. All of it's connected. Literally everything is connected. Every synchronicity. I started with, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and it would always be like 1:11. Or I would keep seeing the number 137 everywhere. And then the next was 432. And I thought, that's weird because a circle with circumference 432 has a diameter of 137 and a half. This is really strange. Why is all this stuff coming up? And these are the signatures of your higher self or your subconscious side peeking through to speak to you. There's a wall, a veil, where we think we're separate from the world around us. It's the veil between X and 1 over X. And that veil is self-imposed. And it can also be self-overcome. Right? And on the other side of that veil, and the merger of those two things is when you find your true genius. Walter Russell said, genius is self-bestowed, and mediocrity is self-inflicted. It's through our own judgments that we can either open and expand our perception to be able to experience our own inner genius, or continue to limit ourselves by making it separate from us. This is only embodied through the heart-brain consciousness. I've always been a logos-oriented person, a left-brained-oriented person. I was always good at math. I chose business because I didn't want to be pigeonholed into one type of career. I was interested in law. I was interested in medicine. I was interested in business. I was interested in all those things. I just didn't want to be stuck in only one thing. And what was interesting for me is to realize that as I expanded my perception across many different fields, and polymathy just means many learnings. That's all it means. I was a musician who gave up music because I wasn't going to be making money at music, but I never really gave it up. I just didn't tell people I was a musician anymore. I always had artistic aspirations and qualities, but I didn't really show the world my art anymore because it wasn't part of the persona that I created for who I was going to be as a serious businessman. I'm an investor. I'm a serious business guy who leads industries and is a CEO. That's not stuff that CEOs do. But as I started to embrace those softer aspects, which I would say were more on the feminine for myself, the feminine energies, then you get access like a portal to higher wisdom. And it's the wisdom that comes as a result of being able to expand your perception. You're no longer playing this game of polarity of like saying, okay, I'm going to be the Democrat who fights a Republican and the Republican who fights the Democrat. I just couldn't do that anymore. And by getting beyond that is when I started tapping into a higher knowledge that I had never before experienced. It was through acceptance and love. And then the heart starts to take on its role. At the sinoatrial node, one of the jobs I had, as I mentioned, my first job, I was a cardiac tech. Cardiac tech. And I look back now, I'm like, okay, I was in the medical aesthetics industry, I was in cardiac, I was in ophthalmology, and all of these are fundamentally important to what I'm doing now. Right? And perception is all about the eye. Right. And even I just read recently that the eyes are actually the last part of the brain to develop, and actually they're just the brain that's exposed to the outer world. Yeah. And I found that very fascinating. And if you really study like the retina and rods and cones and things like macular edema and age-related macular degeneration and lens degradation over time, cataracts, et cetera, which I do, and I have lots of intellectual property in those fields, right? The two most important areas that I would have chosen would have probably been cardiology and ophthalmology, and those are the areas. Now, in retrospect, I would have chosen that. So it's like I must have chosen it in the very beginning, right? Even before coming here, if there's a such thing as before, right? Because maybe it's all just now. And I've just created this matrix game for me to experience. But the heart has the sinoatrial node, which actually has a brain in it. And you can think with your heart. It's not as familiar. It's not as easy to do. But you can definitely do it. And the heart brain means that you can not only access the heart aspect, which is really at the top of your heart. And there's a specific geometry for it, and you can think of it even as its own separate chakra as well. But beyond that, you also can cross the corpus callosum, which is a connective tissue that separates the left and right brains. And when people suffer from epilepsy, one of the things that they have to do is they will often have a procedure done, which will separate the brain so that they can't get this electrical, sort of explosion going across both the hemispheres of the brain. And that stops their seizures. We have the same thing with people that suffer from atrial fibrillation or ventricular fibrillation, or if they have something that is an errant pathway. Wolff-Parkinson's White syndrome is also what it's called, and you have to have a cardiac ablation. This would be the similar type of procedure analogous to separation of the corpus callosum. But our highest divinity and our highest wisdom and understanding comes when we can think with both sides, both the rational and the irrational, both the masculine and the feminine, both the line and the curve. And a world without curves is not a very beautiful world. So being able to transcend that and then have the heart really lead that decision process, and that also enables you to be able to surrender to the universe's divine plan and wisdom for you. You're now operating connected to the universe. You're not separate from it and fighting against it. Because you realize the universe isn't happening to me, it's happening for me.
For you and through you. And I feel like as you're speaking to raising your awareness, you start to feel into how the nature of intelligence is orchestrating you to become that one, to realize that you are the one, and there's all is in one and one is in all. And
that's why Neo's name was Neo, right? You can see it's just a rearrangement of the same letters of the number one.
And in that movie, like you see all the things that show up as almost synchronicities, right? It's like and I think of deja vu often as well. I'd love to get your opinion on that. But we become available to synchronicities and actually becoming aware of them much more in our daily life. Is there anything you want to touch on with that?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So when I founded my company, the first company I named was a company called Alpheon. And the original name, I kept seeing it, was AEON. AEON. And I kept seeing like ringing the New York Stock Exchange bell or something. I could see, and it was like a ticker symbol, AEON. I was like, okay. Then I looked up the company, and the company's name was taken. So Aeon was taken, and the ticker symbol was taken. And so I was like, well, I can't call it AEON. I'll call it Alpheon. Maybe that company will sell and something will change, and so I'll be able to capture it later on. So a few years later, I started this company, Alpheon. It grew very fast. It became a unicorn very quickly. And we went to register it. It wasn't going to be on the New York Stock Exchange. It was going to be on the NASDAQ. And So we grabbed the company that had the ticker before it got sold in the meantime. And so we grabbed the name AEON. So I was like, okay, that's symbolic. That's really cool. So it'll be Alphaeon with the ticker AEON. Well, then Alphaeon ended up going the route of becoming the second largest healthcare lender in the United States. So we do consumer lending and everything through this business. And then the other healthcare aspects of it, we sort of separated out. And we founded another company in early 2019 called Aon, AEON. So it was part of the same company, just sort of spun out of the same company. And now that company just announced that it's basically going public via a SPAC merger. Right. And in the next few months, it'll be done, probably, the next couple, 2-3 months. And it's so funny to me because there's going to be a bell ringing. And I had no idea, right, that the circuitous path is going to have to take for it to end up being the truth. Now, was it my commitment to it? Who knows? I don't know. I didn't really think about it that much in the meantime. It just was almost serendipity. It was just like happenstance in a way that it just kept working out. And then now, all these years later, it's exactly what's happening. It's been 11 years since that time. So I could look at that and I could say, what a coincidence. That's a quinky dink. Or just like I've survived through 3 plane crashes. Someone that sees the glass half full would, like me, see it as I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I've lived through 3 plane crashes. Oh my gosh. And yet sometimes I travel with people who are like, I don't want to fly with you. like you're like bad luck. It's like that's super unlucky. I'm like, I've survived 3 plane crashes. I'd say that's pretty lucky. But you see what I mean? Yeah. Anything that you experience could be seen in one context or another, and it might be radically different. I have a friend whose son was killed in a suicide bombing, 11-year-old son, in Sri Lanka, which was a retaliation bombing that happened by jihadists after they felt they had to retaliate against a killing that had occurred in New Zealand by a neo-Nazi on a mosque, 50 people dying. But Sri Lanka is more than 3,000 miles away from New Zealand. How are the two things even related? But the suicide bomber was hailed as a hero. But the only person that died, besides himself, in this bombing was an 11-year-old boy who was entirely innocent. And yet it's a war. So in his family, in his village, in his peer group, the suicide bomber was a hero. It's hard for us to say what is right and what is absolutely wrong. Very difficult. And this has been one of the oldest things throughout time. You have a shepherd in the Middle East somewhere who had a really tough summer, and the crops or the hillside has been destroyed by the sun. It's very dry. And the other that's covered by shade still has grass on it. So he looks over and he says, oh, my neighbor over there has really green pastures and I don't. And you know what? It's amazing. He worships a different God. And last night, my God appeared to me and told me to kill him and take his land and consecrate it to my God. This is the oldest story in the book. There is no older story than this. We can't separate what we think of as right and wrong from our own bias and benefit. That's another thing that has to be recognized. So when I looked at this name Aeon, I later learned Aeon in the Greek sense means gods. The gods. The Greek gods are often referred to as aeons. They could have been spelled A-E-O-N. It's also a reference to time, aeons of time. Right. And A-I-O-N is another spelling for it as well, because it's really this ligatured A-E in Greek. But what's interesting is that there's also a book written by Carl Jung by the name of Aeon, which was about the individuation path.
The phenomenology of self.
The phenomenology of self. Now, I had no idea about any of this when I came up with it, but I knew there was something special to it, and I knew that one of the meanings to the word Aeon was I am. So and also, if you look at it, it's A-E-O-N. So you've got the same letters besides the letter A as the number 1. right? That's kind of interesting. So there's something to gematria also. Maybe you've heard of gematria, where you can actually read the Bible in different forms of Greek gematria, English gematria, simple gematria, and there are numbers that are basically significant to each one. So in simple gematria, the letter A would be the number 1.
Got it.
And in Greek gematria, it would be the same. But there's 24 numbers, right, that would then be associated with the Greek alphabet. But what's interesting is that they didn't actually have a numbering system. So if you go back in time, the Greek language was the letters of the language was their numbering system. And that was true all the way up until the advent of the Arabic numerical system, right? So that means that literally gematria was embedded into everything. From Greek, right? If the number 1, the number 2 is B, the number 3 is gamma, right? Or C, which is from camel, Gimel, and bet is house. So Aleph bet would be bull house. Aleph means bull, right? And that's true in all those most of the Semitic languages, right? So alpha. So when you start realizing the whole thing is connected, there's nothing that's not connected. And then I learned that in Greek, when you flip a word around, it also has a meaning very often. So what is the opposite of aeon? No way. Have you ever heard of Noetics? Noetics Institute, which is about thought and consciousness. So now aeon on one direction means I am, and in the other means I think. Is this all coincidence? And both are irrevocably tied to the number 1, just like Neo is with 1. These are realizations that we come to, and we can actually find the divinity in all of it. And so some people might look at that and say, that's just all pure coincidence, Robert. You're totally out of your mind. Well, okay. But when you start looking at mathematics and probabilities, it doesn't work. Falls apart on its face. Why is it that the latitude of the Great Pyramid is exactly down to 1 meter per second perfection, the exact speed of light? 29.9792,458 degrees north is the latitudinal reference of the center of the Great Pyramid. Okay, so then people say, but that's only one of the axes. Okay, what's the other axis? The other axis is 31 degrees, 8 minutes, and 3.1 seconds, which comes out to be exactly 1 over pi. So one axis is the speed of light, and the other axis is 1 over pi? Really? So that means that I've got 9 digits to get 299,792,458 meters per second. And then now I've got another 6 digits at 31 degrees, 8 minutes, right? And 3.1 seconds. So for me to pick perfectly exactly 15 digits of accuracy, that's like 10 to the 15th power, right? That it's going to land exactly on those. I mean, please. Really? We live in a simulation.
Before we go into like the possibility or like I guess who in your thought like how the pyramids were built and potentially by who. What are some other mathematics that are encoded within the pyramids?
Oh, geez.
I mean, I know this is a rabbit hole that we spent hours on, but if you just want to share a few because it's
Metatron's cube.
Yeah.
So the Greek system of geometry was all about how do you draw geometric forms without any measurement, because God, in his creation, doesn't have to use a ruler. Right. So that means that it has to be perfect ratio-based. We live in a ratio-based universe that has to be perfect at all scales, all based on ratio. In order for us to know something, it's kind of like how do you know what pleasure is if you can't experience pain? So think of it as 2 lines. Right? 2 lines of perspective. One line of perspective would be, this is what I know and I feel like, and the only thing real in this universe is the emotions that we take from our perceptions, even misperceptions of the world around us, or misguided perceptions sometimes. And I experienced this is what pain is, and then there's another line of what pleasure is. And then we can contrast the two, because without the context of what its opposite is, and then you start realizing that, wait, Okay, so if I'm a communist, then I'm a left-winger, right? But why is it that if I look throughout history, every single case where there was communism, like attempted, it always became fascist regimes, without exception. I mean, I studied political science and hegemonic stability and everything. There's never once been a successful communist society that didn't devolve into fascism and despotic autocracy. It's just a fact. So when people say to me, okay, I want to go for communism, I understand the intention behind it. I get it. It's very seductive. But the truth is, it's never happened. And there have been many attempts. What's up with that? It's like the best form of government is probably a really good, righteous king. And the worst form of government is a really bad king. So in order to avoid really bad kings, we have democracy. So it's like the least worst of all government forms. Okay, maybe there's something better. And I actually see maybe something coming in the future, but who knows? Maybe there's technology that can intercede on this too, like blockchain, which I think has a voting mechanism and it could be better. But having said all of that, the point is that everything has to be ratio-based. So the key to being able to square a circle, for example, is I can square a circle if I can measure it. I can square it on my computer if I can measure it. But if I can't measure it, how could I ever draw it perfectly?
And for people that aren't familiar with that term, squaring the circle is essentially...
Squaring the circle can be done in two ways. One way is you match the perimeter of the square is the exact same length to the circumference of the circle. Okay, so you draw a circle and you draw a square with the exact same length. Now you could say, wait, that's not possible because the circle is irrational, right? And the square, is not irrational, but it could still be irrational because you could have, if you have the exact perfect length, you could have the square root of pi, for example. If the perimeter of the square has to be pi, then the square root would be one of its sides. And you could have, the circumference of the circle be pi. And then you could match it. So it is possible. It's possible to do it, and you can watch Numberphile on this as well. If you do it on a computer and you can perfectly measure it, on GeoGebra you can do it accurate to 17 decimal digits of accuracy. GeoGebra is a Google program, and I use it all the time. But I'm talking about the level of variance on that is 100 times smaller than one hydrogen atom. Okay, so that's pretty accurate, no matter how you look at it. But the thing is that you have to be able to do this with just pencil and straight edge, and there can't even be any lines of measurement on the straight edge, and a compass. That's it. Pencil, straight edge, and a compass. So how can you do this? And there are three sets of impossible problems that the Greeks always tried to solve. The first of these was squaring the circle. How do you square the circle? One way is the way I mentioned. The other way is that you can square the circle by matching the area of the square with the circle. That's a different calculation, right? So the square would be a different size than it would if you were just doing it for perimeter matching circumference basis, right? But how can you do either one of these with no measurement? That's tough.
Tapped in.
You got to be tapped in. And the ancient Greek philosophers believed that squaring the circle was a meditative practice that allowed you to balance the energies of the feminine and the masculine to tap into this higher genius. That was the purpose. That was what becoming a philosopher was really all about. And philosophy was not the study of rhetoric as it is today, but a bunch of people talking about their opinions and the opinions of others throughout time. Philosophy was an end result that came as a function of being a polymath, learning many things, breaking down judgments, because if you're only in hyperspecialization, the end result of that is you become polarized. Because you can only see the world through the lens that you've chosen to see it through, right? It's as simple as that. So
the lover of wisdom, right?
Lover of wisdom is what the word philosophy means, right? And Philomath, is what my first book was named, is lover of learning. Mathematics in the Greek sense did not mean, before Aristotle, there are a lot of people before Aristotle. So you had Socrates before Aristotle, you had Plato, you had Pythagoras, right? Aristotle was more of a botanist who decided to classify the word mathematics from its original meaning and narrow its meaning. Because that's what botanists do. They make classifications like phylotypes and haplotypes and all this. So what he did is he came and said, you know what? You guys under Plato at the Academy referred to mathematics as the language of all learning, the seat of all knowledge. You know, on the Academy of Plato, there was a sign above the door. Let no man who knows not geometry enter here. Right. Because they felt that was the connection to the divine. Back to the Pythagoreans, same thing. They had some really weird esoteric stuff that detracted us, words that were not supposed to be uttered. Right. And they were understanding this notion of rationality and irrationality. They were on the verge of really getting a deeper understanding and wisdom around it. But what this means is that if you can balance the square and the circle accurately without measurement, and you can just do it naturally, then you have achieved a degree of philosophy. You've gone beyond polymathy to philosophy. So my next book is going to be called Philosopher, right? And in the ancient sense of the word, not in what philosophy means today. In the ancient sense, it was a true lover of wisdom. So you have Philomath, a lover of learning, not the study of quantity, a lover of all learning, because that's what mathematics meant. And then Polymath is many learnings. And then the third step is philosopher, and that's why they called it the philosopher's stone. You could actually say that a philosopher in the ancient sense was more of a magician, right? Who was equally balanced between their brain hemispheres. So Leonardo da Vinci, philosopher. That's why their words somehow have some transcendence, and we study them today. They're the ones who discovered pretty much all the science that is at the root of all of our learning in university. But now we've irrevocably change what it means to be a philosopher. You get a doctorate in philosophy, but you know nothing about philosophy. Right? You're a hyper specialist. So this is one of the problems with our education system today, because it's running anathematically towards a direction that polarizes society, not integrates it. That's a whole other discussion. Yeah. But this idea of being able to find these mathematical correlations and do it naturally means that you have to do it with intersections. So Metatron's cube, the reason I can draw every geometry in Metatron's cube, and using a 4-point repetition of Metatron's cube to get a 24-point cycle around it, which is what the prime number pattern is based on too, is because within its lines of intersection, you can find all of those geometric shapes. You just find where they naturally intersect. It's like playing connect the dots. It's very simple, actually. It's super simple. So in that, you can find the icosahedron, the dodecahedron, and everything. So the idea is, are there lines that we can put as a structure to find the way to square the circle using intersections somehow? Are there natural intersections? And the answer is there are. But it's very closely kept up until now. It has been something that was not intended to be part of this timeline until now. And now we can actually release it to the world. And that's basically what's happening. And that's what's very exciting. So the Great Pyramid, if it is a perfect structure, should have been built using the same principles. But what are those principles? What's it based on? Well, Thoth says, built I the Great Pyramid and the Emerald Tablets. Right? He says it straight up.
Quite the statement there.
So then I started searching for maybe there's an intersection in Metatron's cube that gives me exactly the pyramid side face. Mm-hmm. And I was on an airplane. and I don't know what it was, but I just had this burst of inspiration. I'm like, I just have to connect this dot to this dot. And then place a point here, and then draw a circle from the base of Metatron's cube, which is the base of the star point, and make that the radius. Then that gives me the exact base width of the Great Pyramid, and then draw the top peak of the pyramid right to the center of Metatron's cube, and let's see if that's 51.8536 degrees, and it is. So this means that the Giza Plateau, and not just the Great Pyramid, but all three pyramids, and even the plateau itself, is derived from the inherent intersections of Metatron's cube. That's the perfect geometry of it. And by the way, the Great Pyramid, just drawing that exact thing, gives you the exact perspective in line. The top of that circle becomes a circle, that then one half of the base width of the pyramid will have a square that's easy to construct from, that will have the exact same perimeter value as to the peak of the Great Pyramid, representing a circle at the base of the ground up to the top of the Great Pyramid. So the pyramid is actually the only triangular face that can square the circle. No other shape of triangle, not an equilateral triangle, can do this. Only an isosceles triangle with the exact proportions of the Great Pyramid can actually square the circle. And not only that, but the area of the pyramid side face, its cross-section, versus the area of that circle, that same circle, is identical. So you've triangled the circle, or sometimes referred to as trining the circle, through this divinity of this triangle. So the mathematics of the Great Pyramid is beyond any doubt absolutely perfect. It answers the question. It is the cipher key to squaring the circle. In fact, you can square the circle just by knowing the proportions of the pyramid, and from that, work it backwards. But the way to come to that proportion is to draw Metatron's cube. And then just connect two dots inside Metatron's cube. I did a video posting on it. You can also find it on my website on this connection. And it's absolutely accurate. So it really led to me thinking, okay, well then, I guess it was Metatron. I guess it was Thoth.
So that's where it's led you to this day. You do believe in like how could it have perfectly come together in your understanding, or at least the best guess that you have currently in this life, how Thoth or Hermes Trismegistus would have been able to orchestrate such a creation.
It's just like I said, Teotihuacan is like Teotihuacan. Right? Tahuti is the other name for Thoth. Feathered serpent also, which is just Kundalini rising, same thing. Staff of Hermes. When you look throughout history and find the name of the original architects that even the mainstream archaeologists believe was the architect for the Great Pyramid, they call him Hemiunu, which is like Hermes. Right? It's the same thing. The pronunciations are slightly different, but it's the same thing. And you find that signature all over. Now, the other things that I think would be most salient, because I think for the reductionists out there, I want you to know that people are like, oh, but wait, you're using the speed of light in meters per second, and how could this relate to the Great Pyramid when there was no meter when the pyramid was built? Good question. Okay. Well, the King's Chamber has a perimeter of exactly 31.4159 meters, which is exactly pi times 10. How did that happen? And the entry into the King's Chamber is 1 meter high. So they must have been measuring something. And actually, if you look at it, it's all part of inherent geometry. Because if I take the number 6, which is the fathom, 6 feet, and the first reference to the mile and the first reference to feet, etc., were embedded inside of Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest book on the planet. We don't have. If you try to find the origination of astrology, you will not be able to find the first reference in history because beyond the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's mentioned right there. And it's the same as the Western type of zodiac that we have today. That's pretty remarkable, don't you think? That's super remarkable. So where did it come from? How did it get there? And then when you really dig deep into it, you find out that legend has it that Thoth gave it to us, along with all the measurements as well. So wait a minute. The pyramid then clearly used the meter in it. It's a natural proportion of even the indentations on the sides of the pyramid are 1 meter. There's actually 8 sides of the pyramid. It's not only 4 sides. They have slight indentations, and that indentation is 1 meter, and it's 0.00432 of the length of the side, which is 432 long cubits as well. And when you start looking at this and relating it back to other sites like Mexico, for example, Teotihuacan, the height of the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico is 216 feet. The height of the smallest pyramid on the Giza Plateau is called Menkaure Pyramid. It's 216 feet. The base width of the Great Pyramid of 756 feet is the identical base width of the Pyramid of the Sun, 756 feet. How could this be? Right. I mean, it's too uncanny. The base width of the Pyramid of the Moon in Mexico is 481 feet, and the height of the Great Pyramid in Egypt is 481 feet. It's the same. The designer of the Teotihuacan Plateau is the same, I believe, or at least operating on the same knowledge as the designer and builder of the Teotihuacan and Giza Plateau pyramids. And very likely, I've found connections to the Faroe Island pyramids as well, the Bosnian pyramids. They're all based on these same harmonic numbers. So then you have to ask the question, then did they have access to a meter? Did they know the meter? Well, if you take 6 feet for fathom, which is just father, fathom, mother backwards, right? Father, mother. 6 feet and subtract the Euler number, remarkably, you get 1 meter. Right? 6 feet minus the Euler number gives you 3.281 feet. So wait a minute. This means that they had the knowledge of the Euler number? I believe they did as well, because the Great Pyramid is built all on that exact same Euler and pi relationship. In fact, the solution to squaring the circle, you have to understand the concept of Euler. And that's why Da Vinci didn't square the circle when he drew the Vitruvian Man. The area of the square should have been pi, and the area of the circle should have been pi from a ratio perspective. But actually, the area of his square is the Euler number, 2.718, which is not 3.14159. And the Euler number was only supposed to have been discovered by Isaac Newton 200 years later. So wait a minute. How could all this be so perfect? And that's the point. The other two things that are the impossible tasks are doubling the cube. How do you double the cube? This started in a plague with Plato, and he went to the Senate and was like, what do? We got to figure out how to overcome this COVID problem that we've got amongst their population that raged on for 8 years and killed lots and lots of people. So they said, go to talk to the Oracle of Delphi. And the Oracle of Delphi said, the answer is you have to double the cube of Delos. The cube of Delos was the altar to the sun god Apollo. And if you can perfectly double it, then all sickness will be eradicated from the land. And so the Greek mathematicians are like, how do we solve this? How can we do without measurement exactly the increase of one side of that cube to double the volume? The answer is the cube root of 2. So you have to find the solution to the cube root of 2. How can you do it? Well, Da Vinci did it perfectly. He took the base of his square that had the Euler number as its area. You take 1/2 of it and use that as 1. And then take the navel to the upper corner of the square, the navel being the center of the circle, to the upper corner of the square is the cube root of 2. So now you can double the cube volume. It's through a construction box. Da Vinci left us with this missized square with his circle was the construction box necessary to know the intersections of how to square the circle correctly. It was a construction box, just like a golden ratio construction box. We can use it. There's no measurements involved in it. You can construct it. He created a construction box. And then the third problem is trisecting the angle. How can you take an arbitrary angle and trisect it? And I discovered a method, and as I drew it, the solution was that it looked like an owl. All of it came out like an owl. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. It's like the wisdom of the owl. And by the way, you know what the Euler number means in German? So Euler number, I told you, was supposed to have been discovered by Isaac Newton, not by Leonhard Euler, who's a Swiss German mathematician who was credited with it, but he was not credited with the discovery. They somehow just gave the name to him. Well, his name Euler means in German owl. And an owl is a unique animal in that it's the only animal that can turn its head on its axis 271.8 degrees. Damn. It's a simulation.
That's the
best mnemonic of all time, right? Euler means owl. 271.8 degrees. That's how far the owl can turn its head. Approximately 272 degrees. Pretty epic.
Man. The synopsis of this whole podcast is a simulation. Because it's like it's not just the intellectual understanding of all this. It's seeing how intelligently designed the reality is all around us. Real quick, because there's a couple things I want to jump into real quick. But what, from your understanding, is the purpose of the pyramids? Because my study through like Melchizedek lineage, I have some understanding of what I feel like maybe it was used for. But from your understanding, I'd be curious to hear what was the purpose at the time, the energetic signature of the pyramids being created? What was that for?
Since you mentioned Melchizedek. So Melchizedek is someone that throughout history, first of all, this is the fellow in the Bible in Genesis that Abraham paid tithes to. You don't know much about him. We know his name comes from the root Hebrew word Malki, right? Which in like Indian or Pakistan they refer to as Malik. And in Hebrew, the word king is Malak also. Like Melech Hashem means like, king of earth, right? King of Melech Hashem Olam, right? Of the world, right? So you could say like king of kings. And Melchizedek means like justice or peace. Melchizedek is like king of justice or peace. So who was this Melchizedek? Because there's not much written about him in the Old Testament. It's referred to as the keys of Melchizedek. That there are certain keys granted of wisdom and knowledge, hidden esoteric knowledge, to Melchizedek. Who else besides Melchizedek had such keys? Solomon. Keys of Solomon. You probably heard of the seal of Solomon. And they all have sigils too. They'll have their own sigil. So the sigil of Melchizedek, or the seal of Melchizedek, looks like an octagonal shape, right? And that immediately alerts you because you're like, wait a minute, that's interesting, because Metatron and Mercury and Thoth also have a lot of symbology related to the number 8. The number of days in the Mercury year is 88 days. So 8 and 8 is often associated with Thoth or Mercury. You may have heard that before. 8 is also associated with abundance. 888 is Christ consciousness. So interestingly, you start noticing there's several other people that have these kinds of keys granted them, this extra wisdom or something. One was Enoch, another person with a name like Eno or Neo, right? And so you've got Enoch, who many believe was the human form of Metatron, right? You have Melchizedek, who many believe was one of the incarnations of Thoth and Metatron on earth. You have Solomon, who many believe was likewise the same, right? Saint Germain. There are many people throughout history, and usually those people are associated with having access to certain keys. The key is the wisdom of understanding relative to the Great Pyramid, the mystery of it. The Great Pyramid, I believe, is a reflection of our conscious progression. So we know already that the Vitruvian Man, when we overlaid the Vitruvian Man, because of this proportion of this one square and one circle as well, we could figure out that if we overlay the pyramid within it in exactly the right way, all the chambers match up with the horizontal lines that Da Vinci drew on the Vitruvian Man's torso and knees as well. And so it posits then that maybe there are yet undiscovered chambers inside the Great Pyramid that represent, and these also happen to be exactly as chakra centers, right? So maybe the chambers represent the chakras. And this became the subject of a television show that we have on streaming TV, on Amazon Prime and on Gaia, right, called Codex. It's done really well. I just had dinner with the CEO of Gaia last week, and he told me it's done very, very well. But the thing about this then is it says that this is a map, right? And then we found that Da Vinci did go to Egypt for 3 years. We found a reference to it. He actually wrote all about it. And it was found in Codex Atlanticus, but often dismissed as being fictional Da Vinci never wrote fiction. He wasn't a fiction novelist, so why would he write fiction in this particular case? It was a letter he wrote to the Devatdar of the Sultan, or the Lieutenant Devatdar of the Sultan of Cairo, who he worked for. In an engineering capacity, nobody knows exactly what it was. There are many in Egyptology that believe that there was a map to the Great Pyramid, to the inner structures of the Great Pyramid. Now, there have been many new structures recently, so we know there's a big void space around where the throat chakra line is. That was found in 2017 using the Muon scan. And there have been more recent Muon scans done by a Japanese delegation that have now called out 20 new structures and 3 new chambers inside the Great Pyramid that we didn't know about before. So you could say that as we lift our consciousness, more of our chakras open up. And as these chakras open up, more will be understood and revealed related to the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid, and what I discovered in there, and it's the subject of the show on Gaia, is the walls are literally covered in petroglyphs in the King's Chamber. Not only the King's Chamber, but also the Queen's Chamber. The first time I went there, I didn't notice any of it. I didn't see it. Second time I went in 2018, I was drawing in my notebook Alpha Omega the entire trip. I was in Israel the week before, and then I went to Egypt. And on the flight to Egypt, and I brought like 12 of my friends with me as well, I knew that I was going to discover something. I didn't know what it was, but I kept drawing my notebook. I was telling everybody, I'm like, I'm going to discover something. I'm going to discover something. I know I'm going to discover something. And I was drawing my notebook this Alpha Omega and the sacred geometric form of Alpha Omega. And as I got into the Great Pyramid, I was standing over the sarcophagus, and one of my friends was laying in it, and I was helping them find the pitch to resonate the chamber, because it really goes loud. It's wah, 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 like super loud. Have you ever done it before? You have to do it. It's next level stuff. And so I was standing above it, and I had a memory flashback of seeing some green light, like greenish blue light, melting or pressing Alpha Omega into the rim of the sarcophagus. And me standing in the same spot that I was in, and knowing exactly where to look. And then I looked at that exact spot, and there was Alpha Omega right on the rim. And I knew enough about the pyramid to know there's no writing in there, other than there's like graffiti on the walls and everything. But this is like clearly pressed. And this is dolerite. You can't chip this stuff. If I had a hammer and a chisel, you could never do it. The whole thing would crack. It's the most brittle stone, almost the most brittle stone on the entire planet. It's made of 55% quartz crystal. So if I took a hammer and chisel to quartz, you know what happens? Shatters. So I looked down at this thing, and I was like, wow, and I remembered it. And that was the first time that I had like a past life memory or something. And I remembered seeing the other people in the room. There were like 5 other people in the room. They were not the same people. I was like transported exactly to that moment in time. And then I looked down exactly where I saw the pressing into the stone of the Alpha Omega and other stuff on the backside of the sarcophagus. And it's exactly where it was. And now you can see it. And the archaeologists that were there, they were like, did you do this? And I'm like, no, I didn't do this. Yeah, I just chipped it out just now. Please, it's not happening. Like, give me a break. And it's 5.6 inches wide, which is exactly the 5.605 inches, which is the square root of 31.4159, which is pi times 10, which is the perimeter of the room in meters. So that was kind of interesting to me as well. So I started, on my next trip back, I started looking at the subtle